Hi, I'm Patric Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background to this show is that Favro customers are some of the most innovative companies in the world. Enterprises wanting to be more agile, software as a service companies scaling fast, and game developers and publishers wanting to master live ops. So we get to know some truly inspiring leaders in product development, marketing, operations, sales, executive management. And what we do here is that we interview them about leadership so we can all learn from them. Let's go. And we are live with Jon Lawrence. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Nice to join you on the show, and it's been long awaited.
Yeah, this is really cool. I know we are in the summer, and a lot of people are on vacations, so I really appreciate, you taking the time. And I think we have a very interesting, topic today, to talk about kind of, studio internal versus like external, business leadership and that kind of whole relationship. And most importantly, how that is, has been changing and how you feel that it is changing. But before we get into that, we need to get to know you a little bit better for the ones who haven't met you before. So, what's your story leading up to, what you're doing today?
Sure. So yeah, my background's always been in project management in various industries. I started off in retail actually, way back in the 80s, and then went on to doing some research and development, project management, and it was actually my boss that ended up one day announcing that he was going off and he was going to join a company called Bullfrog, and everybody else in the room was super excited about the fact that he was going off to join this games company, and I was like, "Oh right, okay, well that sounds like an interesting prospect," but didn't really think anything more of it. And then one day he approached me and said he'd arrived at Bullfrog, but they didn't have any project managers. Project managers was very much a thing. This was back in the back in '98, and basically there was no such thing as a project manager in Bullfrog. So I went down and talked to them. Super excited about what they were doing in terms of the games. Obviously had heard a lot about the games that they had made previously, and kind of talked to them about what I felt a project manager could bring to the games. There was a lot of very skeptical people in the room at the time. I know that, talking about, well, we don't need project managers. Games are ready when they're finished. You can't just manage that, and you can't project manage it. But anyway, I managed to get through the interviews there, and they took me on. And sure enough, from '98 onwards, I've stayed within games pretty much. Majority of the time I spent at Electronic Arts, had some really good experiences there, working on mainly starting franchises. So when Harry Potter came to EA, I worked on the early games with Harry Potter. When they got the F1 license, I managed those. And then when Electronic Arts purchased Criterion, I ended up going down to Criterion Games to help bridge that gap between EA and Criterion. So many interesting experiences there. I then also had a spell where I went into mobile games. So I worked at on CSR2 with Natural Motion for a while. And then I took a chance and went out to Dublin and worked with a small studio out there called Digit Games. I met the founder there, Richard Barnwell. He asked me if I'd ever heard of a game or if I'd ever heard of Star Trek, which was like, oh, well, who's never heard of Star Trek before? He said, well, I'm working on this little mobile game called Star Trek Fleet Command. Really a make or break for the studio. So I went out there, worked with him. We managed to launch that successfully, and actually it's gone on to be a massive success for the studio, and they've ended up becoming part of the Scopely family. Since then, I've had a spell back at Electronic Arts working for EA Partners, and then at the start of last year I ended up working took a position with Tencent, working in a new group that supports some second party studios. These are studios that are either owned or have a majority investment from Tencent, and I work as part of a new team called the Nexus team. We're based out of Liverpool, and we support 5 different studios. We support Sharkmob, we support Sumo, we support Inflexion, we support Tequila Works, and Splash Damage. And my role is the development director there, so I need to work and support the 5 studios from a development point of view. They obviously have the creative ideas. They bring the creative ideas. We kind of are almost like the consultants that are going in there, helping them get the games delivered, helping them to connect within Tencent, and obviously all the things that brings. So that's really kind of been my journey as to where I am today.
And I think it's very interesting. Well, firstly, it's a very interesting journey. So super happy to have you on the show. I was doing a production keynote at the conference not so long ago, and I was introduced as a veteran in the industry, and I was like,
it just means that we're old,
like that or not?
Yeah.
And I guess you have the same situation. And I also guess in your current role, it's a big advantage to be able to draw from experiences from so many places. But I want to ask you a specific question here, because when we talk about studio leadership, internal studio leadership, production productivity, all these kind of things, which is if you kind of look at my show here, a lot of conversations are around like how do we make better games in a faster way, so forth. But now we're having this conversation, the relationship between all of that leadership and the external business leadership. And I think that in many cases people would automatically assume that will be a relationship with a publisher. But in your case, it's a little bit different. Can you just expand a little bit on compare and contrast the relationship that you are having with the studios you work with versus what a relationship would be, for example, between a third-party studio and a publisher?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because, essentially when the job that I would have been doing at EA Partners, for instance, is not a lot different to the job that we're doing within the Nexus team. The obvious difference is the fact that we're all sat on the same side of the fence. We're not going in there as the publisher. We're all part of Tencent. Ultimately, we're all part of the same family. And the difference there is the fact that ultimately the job relies on the fact that you're building a relationship that's built on trust. As I said, we've got 5 different studios that we're working with. And with each of those studios, we need to build the relationship whereby we've got, that element of trust where that we walk in there, we feel the studios feel that, we're a familiar face to them and that we're on their side. And ultimately the knowledge that we take in there, the kind of advice that we're giving them, they feel that they can trust and that they will ultimately listen to it. So your job is really to get to the point where, the studios feel like they want your advice and they want to listen to you. And, that's very much the approach that we used to have at Electronic Arts. But the difference was that we could ultimately, at the end of the day, go, well, we're the publisher, we're paying the bills. This is why we want it to be in a certain way. Obviously, you would never want to ever get to that point in the relationship where you had to play that card. But, deep down, everybody knew that was the kind of the underlying relationship. Whereas with here, it's very much about, ultimately the team, the studios don't have to listen to you. You can give your advice, you can give them, you can tell them what the stuff that you think would be best for them, but it's ultimately their choice whether they want to listen and whether they want to follow that advice. But as I say, the team that we've built, the Nexus team, is actually, you mentioned the word veterans. Collectively, we must be very old because, I think we worked out we had over 100 years of experience between us. And so, that means that hopefully we're able to go into the studios and be able to give them, the advice based on the different scenarios we've seen, the different experiences that we've had, and that ultimately we're going to them with good solutions that they actually go, oh yeah, that's going to work for our studio, and we can see how that works. So yeah, it's very much built on, you've got to build out the trust, you've got to build out that relationship so that the studios feel comfortable and that they feel like they want to listen to you.
So I have a lot of follow-up questions to this. The first one, maybe a bit more on, let's say, on the personal side here, where how do you feel yourself? The balance between experience and new things. I mean, obviously, for me, who's deep into production practices and how can we work in a more efficient way? There are some. There's some mistakes that are just being done over and over again, and where experience can help to avoid those mistakes. But there's also some areas, where there are new practices developed, and there are maybe new challenges. I mean, I think live ops is a very good example, where these are challenges that we didn't have. If we go back in time, how do you relate to that yourself? To make sure that your advice are both built upon experience but also up to date.
Yeah, I think it's that's where you've got to stay in touch with people. You've got to be, you can draw on your experiences. Obviously, working within mobiles helped with that because obviously you were working very much in a live ops environment. So you can draw on your own experiences, and you can, relate that to the current situations you're facing. But as you say, things change constantly. The what you're dealing with, the problems that you're facing, they will change. But what you need to do is basically stay in touch with the people that are living that and dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. So, I mentioned about our job is to connect people within Tencent, and there's obviously a lot of experience on the Asian market in terms of how they tackle live ops and how they look at games as a service first. And our job is marrying that kind of experience that we've had in terms of PC and console, and bringing games out in the Western market, and how we tap into the experience and the new kind of approaches that we've got within Tencent. So it's kind of connecting the dots, if you like. So, there's a good person with this kind of free to play knowledge that we could actually hook in to this conversation. And you're not the person that's going into the room with all the answers to everything. It's more about you've got some experience that you can bring to the table, and then there's somebody else that via your network, or via the company experience that you could then bring in with a different level of experience. And it's that kind of marrying those bits of knowledge and experience together to create a cohesive conversation with your developers.
And can you give a few examples of like typical situations where you would be leaning in a little bit extra, where hey, this is a typical problem, and you might have some solutions. Used to we get like a little bit like when things get a little bit more hot, it's like, okay, now we got something going on here. What would those situations typically be?
What, in the current role, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously some of the typical day-to-day situations that we face right now is how do we get games out quicker? How do we get the games quicker to market? How do we make them, leverage the needs and the wants of Tencent, and what kind of experience that we have to bring to the developers. To some of the developers, this is going to be a new experience because typically some of the developers that we work with have mainly been work for hire, whereas now they're looking at they're creating their own IP kind of thing, and so it's like, how do we get that? How do we marry that problem where Tencent might want it quicker to market, and we're kind of going, well, hang on a minute, you're going to have to wait, you be a bit more patient to that, and that's a typical kind of scenario that we have to deal with, and it's really kind of it's about stakeholder management there. You've got to kind of put an explanation behind why things take the amount of time that they do, and yes, on one hand, people want things to go quicker, but at the same time, what you don't want to ignore is the fact that you've got to bring out something that's going to be to quality, and it's going to stick around, and it's going to basically be it's going to retain players for over the long term. So it's that kind of thing which it does take time to get to that, and it takes time to hit on the right idea. So we have a lot of processes in place whereby we go through each of the milestones and gates to make sure that we're properly assessing the games at any particular stage. And at that point, we get a lot of the input from the Tencent group. And, typically they're saying, well, could we have this quicker? Well, sometimes it's, yes, you could probably have it quicker. However, we'd have to compromise on some of the scope. And on other hands, it's like, no, this is the concept that we're working against, and it's going to take this amount of time. And here's the reason why it takes this amount of time. So those are kind of the typical problems that we're kind of wrestling with and dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
So let's talk a little bit about change. So the kind of the team and let's say the construction that you're part of now is in itself an evidence to that things are changing in the market, but you also have experience from EA partners, and what I would also like to throw in there is that the last years we also have venture capital going into game studios, which we didn't have if we go back a bit in time. Making a publisher deal was the only way really to finance your development, and so there's a lot of, and of course the whole indie scene. I mean, there's just a lot of things that obviously have changed.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to just hear from you a little bit, like how what's your perspective of how things have changed and what's been driving those changes?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the, from the point where we started out, I mentioned about what's changed. The change to start off with was the whole concept of a project manager in a applying that to a game was something that was very, very, very new. Why do we need the project manager in the mix? And really, the game is ready when it's ready. And so that's obviously one of the biggest changes is the fact that it's now become more of a an industry, and it's more of a business now in terms of how you approach things, and then all the associated roles that go with it. I think in terms of over the years, obviously, one of the biggest changes was we'd get a game finished and everybody would have this downtime. Everybody would probably work towards this end deadline where the game was burnt onto the disc and it was in the box, and then you'd have a little bit of downtime between that and starting afresh on the next game. Whereas now, obviously it's 24/7. It's, you're into the realms of live ops, and as soon as you launch the game, that's where the hard work starts. And I think, one of the approaches, or one of the differences I've found is certainly, the biggest eye opener was when I was working in mobile, in as much as, my job was the development director or the project manager, was to put together the roadmap of this is how we're going to tackle things. So once the game's launched, you've got this roadmap of here's how we're going to roll out the different features, and here's how we're going to satisfy the players' demands and stuff like that. And obviously, the biggest learning was the fact that CSR2 came out, for instance, and we were getting all of the analytical data back telling us what players liked, what they didn't like, and suddenly the roadmap that you were looking at and you'd planned out, you could throw out the window basically, because it was like, well, you've got to react to what the players want. You're not, you're not just going to blindly follow the roadmap and the plan that you've set out. You're reacting to the players, and I think, to me, that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen in terms of, when you approach a launch of a game, is like, yes, you've got to have a semblance of a plan, because you need to know what you're going to work on next, and you're going to have a loose idea of what the team's going to move on to. But the biggest part of that is actually what the players' reactions are, what the players engage with. So they're going to be telling you what are the important elements that you're going to have to work on once it's launched. And I think, to me, that was kind of the biggest change that I've seen in terms of how you approach, a game launching. So really, the game launches, that's where the hard work begins.
Final question, where do you think this is heading? If we have this conversation again in let's say 5 years, what do you think, just taking the trends that you see today, what do you think have changed in 5 years?
In the next 5 years, I see, there's going to be a lot of, the demand for, live ops is just going to keep growing and growing. The games are going to become more free to play. The demand and the, the willingness for players to spend more and more money on games is probably going to change. So whereas in the past we'd be looking at games coming out and we'd be able to charge a premium amount for it, I think more and more games are going to move to free to play. I just think that's going to become the way that players are going to expect their content to be served, and I think the challenge for us as games companies is how do we keep the players sticking around with your game? Because you're seeing now there's so much demand for players' time and their concentration, that if something comes out and it's not great from the start, players don't stick around. They're not going to stick around. They're not going to give you that chance. They'll move on to the next thing. And I think that is the challenge that we face over the next 5 years. It's like, how do you present something that's compelling, that is free to play, and it becomes part of the player's life? I know we used to have a saying, obviously within mobile, you're tracking a lot of KPIs. What's your day 7 retention? What's your day 30 retention? And I know the phrase that we always used to talk about was, well, we need to think about this as day 365 retention. How does what the game that you're going to bring out, how does that next big thing become part of the player's day-to-day life and their day-to-day experience, and how do they keep coming back one day after the next? So I think that's kind of the biggest challenge that we face, and how do we bring that over to console and PC, basically.
Cool. Super thanks for giving a little bit of a glimpse into your world. I think we have some very exciting times ahead.
Absolutely, yeah.
And hopefully you also get a little bit of summer vacation.
Yeah. Well, dealing with 5 different studios means that that doesn't tend to happen too much of the time. But yeah, hopefully we'll fit in around the needs of our studios, obviously.
All right, super. Well, thank you so much, and thanks to the audience, and see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, you know what to do. Share it in your social media so more people can take part and learn. And one more thing, check out Favro Academy on favro.com for many more learnings. Thanks for tuning in.